Well, welcome everybody as we are about to start our first webinar of 2025. How exciting is that? Well, exciting in one sense, time is rushing by on us in another. Well, we're just going to give it a few minutes before, whilst we let people join. We've got people I can see from all around the world again, even from South America joining tonight. So you're very, very welcome to this first webinar of 2025. Got a very special guest, Richard Duckett. He's done some absolutely outstanding work on the war in Burma, not least of all with SOE, and we're looking forward to hearing him talk. As we go through tonight, just make sure that you put your questions in the chat bar and or in the Q&A rather, not from in the chat bar, in the Q&A box. If you put them in the chat bar, it works as a reel, and I don't actually get to you. Have a chat with everyone in the chat bar, but put your questions in the Q&A bar. And are we ready to go, Sylvia? Shall I hand over to you?
I think we are, Rob. Thank you very much. And welcome everybody back to another Kohima Educational Trust webinar, and a Happy New Year to everyone. And much has been happening at KET Camp since we last met, and we're pleased to have launched our new educational initiative finally, whereby we're going to plan to offer bursaries to young Nagas studying outside of India. So if you are interested to know more in this, details can be found on our website. We have also produced our annual newsletter in which details of the bursary scheme can also be found. And I know many of you will already have received this, but if you haven't and would like a copy, just let me know. But back to the webinar tonight, and we are delighted to have with us Dr. Richard Duckett, who in an exclusive for the Kohima Educational Trust will showcase his brand new research for the first time. Collating 5 years of research for this presentation, Richard will reveal all of his latest findings on another forgotten aspect of the 14th Army's campaign to defend India and liberate Burma from Imperial Japan. Richard is a historian, author, and teacher. He has taught history and politics for over 20 years. After studying for his MA in history and starting his teaching career, he studied for a doctorate on a part-time basis with the Open University while continuing to teach. I can't imagine how that must have been full-time. Since finishing his PhD, Richard has continued to research and write, with a fourth book due for publication in June this summer. It's called Jungle Warrior. Richard also maintains a website, www.soeinburma.com, where he publishes original archival research and is well worth looking up. And as always, we are delighted that Dr. Robert Lyman is with us tonight. We feel doubly fortunate to have Rob with us this evening as he's in between trips and tours to Singapore, Burma, Nagaland, and elsewhere. If any of you are contemplating a trip ever to Nagaland, Rob works alongside Sampan Travel and leads guided tours to the battlefields. This year's are probably booked, but look out for the Sampan website and they will feature next year's dates. You should also check out Rob's War Room, which is also hugely worth signing up to. As ever, as Rob said, feel free to use the chat amongst yourselves, but do use Q&A for questions for us. I know Rob and Richard will try and get to as many as they can at the end. Otherwise, we will, as we do, answer them after the event. Okay, over to you guys. Thank you. Rob.
Well, thank you very much, Sylvia. And again, a very warm welcome to everyone who I see is joining us. It's a very exciting community here. Well, many years ago, I was handed a copy of a PhD by an unknown scholar called Richard Duckett. And to my, well, I am almost embarrassed to say this now, it sat in one of the large piles to my right in my study for quite some time. Before I actually had a look at it. And when I opened it up, I was astonished at it because for the first time, and I've studied the Burma campaign for nigh on 35 years now, I had revealed to me the fruits of some remarkable research into operations by Force 136, SOE, in 1945, so towards the end of the campaign. which we're not going to talk in detail about tonight, but we will do in due course, Operation Character. And I very quickly came to the conclusion that Richard Duckett's research and arguments were correct, namely that Operation Character in 1945, the work of SOE, a work authorized and undertaken on behalf of General Bill Slim, commander of the 14th Army, had more dramatic strategic effect in the Burma campaign, far more, in fact, than even Wingate's Chindits and Operation Thursday. Now, that's a big thing to say, isn't it? It is quite extraordinary. And yet, without Force 136, Bill Slim would not have got to Rangoon in 1945. It's really as simple as that. And we have Richard Duckett to thank for that research, which came out in a book, SOE in Burma. Richard, when was that now? When was it published?
2017.
2017.
Yeah.
So Richard and I did a presentation at the National Army Museum shortly after it was published. Really outstanding book. If you don't have it and you want to know more about SOE in Burma, that's the book to buy. And we're really, really pleased, Richard, to have you here tonight to talk about the character who built up that force, Operation Character, Colonel Peacock. And you're going to talk to us tonight about the previous year, the prior year, 1944, and the Allied response to the Japanese invasion of India, Operation Ugo. That's more than enough for me. We're really, really pleased to have you with us, Richard. I'm going to hand over to you. Just a reminder to everyone else, if you've got questions for Richard, stick them in the Q&A box, and I will peruse that as we go through, and we'll try to answer those questions, or Richard will try to answer those questions at the end. Well, Richard, everyone else, enjoy.
Thanks very much for having me, and thanks for the very kind introductions. I would normally come home from work and get changed, but I didn't tonight because I'm wearing my Naga tie from the Ket shop. So get yourself a Naga tie. I quite enjoy wearing mine to school. Also, just wanted to shout out to my students. Hopefully they have been as good as they were, and they are logged on and watching now. So hello to my politics class, and hopefully you'll come back for more on the Kohima Educational Trust after this one. It won't be a one-off just because I'm running it for you. And also thanks to everyone else for tuning in. I'm glad to see that my bait has worked. It is going to be some new research tonight, but it's going to be set in the context of SOE throughout the entire Burma campaign. So I'm quite excited to be talking about this for the first time. There are a few maps as we go through. This first one, I just love maps like this, showing the terrain. And you can see Imphal in the center there, and you can see Palel. And Palel will feature in the story later, as will the Upper Karbor Valley, which is to the right. And to the right of where it says Upper Karbor Valley, there is another big range of mountainous hills, jungle-clad hills, before going down to the Chindwin. So terrain, I think, is really important to bear in mind where all this was happening as we go through. Rightio, let's tell you where I'm going to take you. Well, first of all, you'll see I've put a picture of the memorial to the 2nd Division there, because that's how I got into all of this. My family fought with 2 Division. They came to the relief of Kohima. My grandfather and my uncle were sappers with the Royal Engineers. So this is sort of in memory for them, a lot of what I do. Where I'm going to take you then, I'm going to do a brief overview of SOE up to 1942. I always have to kick myself and remember not everyone knows who SOE were, what they did. My wife just says you just can't assume, but I've been doing it for so long, I just make assumptions. So I'll just do a little bit quickly on why SOE was formed, but it also means I get to show you some of my favourite pictures of the Second World War, and another map, actually. From there, we'll go to SOE at Imphal, from between the retreat until Ugo. So that period between 1942 and 1944, what SOE was up to then. We'll look at SOE's psychological units, the IFBUs, which I published on a little while back, and there was some amazing stuff found in there, which has really enriched my understanding of SOE and their place at the Battle of Imphal. Then we're going to move on to P-Force, which is the the unit formed by Edgar Peacock, the subject of my biography, which is coming out in June. And then just to look beyond Imphal, just to tie things together before we come to some conclusions. I'm aiming to talk for about 35-40 minutes, so if I don't waffle on too much in places going off piste, we should have a good 10 minutes for Q&A at the end. So I hope I stick to my timings. Dad's Army, come on, you got to have a bit of Dad's Army in your life. So what we getting at here? Well, Britain, 1940, we know what happened. There was a series of defeats on the continent, in France as well as Norway, followed up by the retreat out of Greece, and then the North African campaign. So SOE was formed in the background of this. This is one of my favourite pictures there. The so near yet so far. There's the Nazis staring across the channel. How did Britain get back in the war? How did they keep the fight going? Well, under the new management of Winston Churchill, of course, we did not capitulate in the summer of 1940, but there had to be some sort of way of hitting back at Germany. And so in July 1940, this is what was sent from the Minister for Economic Warfare, Hugh Dalton, to Lord Halifax, which was sort of a memo that's to set up SOE in that summer. 17 days later, SOE was formed. It was a top secret organization. It was supposed to clandestinely recruit, organize and train indigenous populations in Nazi-occupied European countries and set them to work as saboteurs and guerrilla armies. The earliest reference I've found to a mission, talking about a mission going out to the Far East, was the next month of August 1940. So very, very early on, after SOE was formed, there was this idea that it needed to go out to the Far East. So they talked about it in August 1940, and then they started trying to find a person to lead that mission. And here he is. This was Valentine St. John Killery. He was head of SOE's Oriental mission. That wasn't its original name. Its original name was Scapula, and it was also being called Operation Puma. But the guys that were sent out, they started calling it the Oriental Mission, which the records show that London didn't really like, but the name has stuck. So there we are, the Oriental Mission. Here's the extent of Japanese offensive in 1942. And we can see Burma to the left of the map there. And we can see that all of Burma is coloured in. That's inaccurate. And it's inaccurate because of SOE. Where SOE was not really allowed to get on with its job in some countries after being sent out to Singapore. It arrived in Singapore in May 1941. There was a lot of pushback from military and colonial officials. But in Burma, it was slightly different. The governor of Burma, Reginald Dorman Smith, was more amenable to SOE and its aims. And they were able to put some men into the field before the Japanese invaded, just before. And they were able to do a couple of important things in 1942, which is worth just tracking for you before we get on to the Imphal bit. So here you can see the section of North Burma that wasn't taken by the Japanese. You can see the shaded bit is the limit of Japanese control. It did actually reach a bit further than that. It did get up to Sampradom at one point, but the important airfield at Fort Hertz it was enlarged, and we had quite a large presence very quickly after the retreat in 1942. Operation Puddle flew a load of troops into Fort Hertz, and that means there was a front line actually in Burma. So you'll be more familiar with the front line sort of down the left-hand side of this map, where we can see Imphal on the Manipur front, the Chindwin front, as we're going to call it, the Chindwin front. So the British humiliation followed the humiliations in Europe with the loss of Hong Kong in Christmas 1941, and then the almost complete death of imperial prestige at Singapore in February 1942. And then contemporary documents refer to a Far Eastern Dunkirk, and the Far Eastern Dunkirk is what they used to describe being run out of Burma by the end of May of 1942. So how did they end up with the north of Burma still staying in Allied hands? Well, these guys here played a really important part in the SOE story of 1942 in the retreat. And they both wrote books which are an excellent read. You'll see that one says Francis Clifford. That was his pen name. The guy above him is actually Captain Arthur Leonard Bell Thompson. And beside him there, we've got Jack Bernard, who wrote The Hump. And it was actually Jack Bernard and a few of his men with him who blew up some of the vital bridges between Myitkyina and Sumprabum and held up that Japanese advance, which they never then continued with. Thompson was responsible for the fighting retreat along this road here. I don't know if you can see my arrow on the slides. At Tonggu, the Japanese army were to hook through the Shan states, and Thompson had been working in Burma with another officer, forestry officer, Noel Boyd, and with a company of Karen and some hastily raised Karen levies, they managed to hold up the Japanese advance through the Shan states for about a week. So this contributed to the main army beginning to escape over the Ava Bridge at Mandalay and get back over the border into India, setting us up for what came later with the Battle of Imphal. So I think this is important because contrary to previous narratives, what we can see is that SOE were involved pre the war starting against Japan. They were getting trained at Special Training School 101 in Singapore, teams of men like Jack Bernard here. They were put into the field and they were active during the first Burma campaign, and they had an impact on that campaign. I'm not saying that it's all important, but it's a contribution. And I think we always need to set these things in context. I'm not making a huge claim that they saved the army and without SOE they wouldn't have got to India. But what I am saying, they did contribute to Slim being able to get his Burqa out of Burma and over those hills into India. And two more maps just to show sort of the Japanese advance in. And both of these kind of show the hook from Tonggu going towards the to the right flank to go up towards China. So and there's another map just showing the extent of the Japanese advances in 1942. Now, the point I want to make here is, I think, quite an important one, and this is a headline I think worth talking about. And I'm just going to go back to these maps here, and that is that by June 1942 we have a front line running from down here towards Mongdor Akyab area in Arakan, along the Indo-Burmese border, the inhospitable border with those massive jungle-clad hills, all the way up around, across through. We could draw it through Sumprabum there, and then down the Chinese border. So we've got thousands of miles of front surrounding the top half of Burma. So there was a topographically imposed no man's land running for those thousands of miles. This great big horseshoe right round to Koh Kang in this little bit of Burma up here on the Chinese border, which is still disputed today. And there was a scene of an important SOE operation, not a very successful one, but very important operation, which one day I'll get around to writing up in a bit more detail than I have so far. What's also important to consider is after the retreat that there's no less than 12 secret or irregular units, including SOE, that are competing for men and resources to probe and poke through that horseshoe at the Japanese as they've occupied Burma. ultimately, they've got to prove their utility to Slim, and this is also a really important part of this story, because SOE manages to do this. And I'm coming to the conclusion that it's in no small part due to SOE's presence on the Manipur front at Imphal, that made the operations that Rob was just talking about of 1945, where it says we wouldn't have got to Rangoon without SOE. That is a big one. But it was set up, I think, by the SOE presence around Imphal, and that's what's taken so long to uncover. It's just how much was going on the Manipur front, and how that feeds into this wider story of the general overview of SOE in Burma. With the retreat into India, there's lots of licking of wounds on the Allied part, and it's a period of reorganization and retraining. This is true for the main army as it was for SOE. An India mission had been sent out under the command of Colin Mackenzie, who you see here. He was he's the only SOE head who stayed in position for the entire war, which I think is testament to his skill and tenacity and political and military acumen. He seems to be quite a remarkable man, not least his First World War service as well. But what it meant for Mackenzie is he had a complete pivot from looking from India towards Iran and Afghanistan. Those countries were originally under his remit, to this huge area of Southeast Asia. So the reorganization grouped Burma into Group A, and each country had a country section that was under the command of an officer. And so Burma country section in August of 1942 was under the control of Major Forrester. And Major Forrester, in August 1942, he wrote his plan for SOE's intentions to get back into the war. It's August 1942. It's within weeks of being kicked out of Burma. He's saying, right, this is what SOE is going to do. They're competing for resources. There's all this reorganization going on. But this is put out there by SOE. And the plan is that horseshoe that I've just described, there were to be SOE units going in all around that horseshoe. So whereas some of it is obviously proper SOE work as SOE would have described it, far behind the lines, like the Operation Spears in Kokang, some of the horseshoe, of course, is on that front, including the Imphal front. And that's what I thought, what's going on there? And that's what I've managed to uncover over these last few years. Other clandestine forces, of course, were there too. You've got V Force, you've got Z Force, you've got the Chin levies, the Kachin levies. You've even got something called the Kin Scouts, which Edgar Peacock wasn't too gracious about. They don't appear to have done much. No one seems to be very, very gracious about the Kin Scouts, wherever you find a mention of them. But these units were supposed to operate on the front line. V Force, sort of 20 miles through the front line, Z Force 60 miles. So SOE wasn't really supposed to be on the Imphal front. And I think that's why no one's really looked to see if they were there. And then, of course, with the loss of so many files, I mean, the SOE records are so incomplete. Putting it together really does rely on as this research has shown, on what is held in private hands. So the revelations, a lot of the revelations tonight aren't coming from the archives, they're coming from personal papers, papers kept by the families. And then it's when you put these together with the archives that you suddenly find this rich picture emerging. And sometimes I think it's just a bit of kindness which leads to which has led to a lead here. This one here is there's still some copies going. I just posted on Twitter last week, actually. There's some copies going of it. It was a very limited print run. I think speaking to Desmond Kelly, said there's only 850 printed. So if you want to snap up a copy of that, I can see you all racing now to do so. But Kelly's Burma campaign, there's letters from the Chin Hills. There's reference in a letter to a corporal in charge of an Oriental Mission Wireless. And one wonders if this would have made it into a letter and then published subsequently by Desmond Kelly. If this hadn't happened, it's just the quirks of history, how things get recorded, I suppose. But he wrote a letter saying, I have an Oriental Mission Wireless set in the area now, and the corporal in charge, in return for small kindnesses such as the loan of some crockery. So it's all coming down to a bit of civilization somewhere on the Indo-Burmese border. He's offered on the QT to put through any private messages I wish to send to their agency in Calcutta, whence he could arrange with a friend of his there to have them sent on by telegraph. So there's a bit of a quid pro quo. You can use my crockery, and in return, I want you to get messages back to my family, because the Kelly family were just over in India. So there's the first lead, and then we found out who the corporal was. It's Corporal John Muir, and then he's got a file, which is really rare because most of the NCO files didn't survive. And we find out that he was mentioned in dispatches for his work in the Chin Hills during 1943, because his WT was apparently the only means of communication between 4 Corps HQ and the forward army units. So SOE are playing a vital part in the communications of the army at this point. Major Boyd, who I just mentioned, been on the Morchie Road with Captain Thompson in 1942. He was now an SOE liaison officer. And he visited Imphal and Tamu at the end of January 1944. And from his report, you can find out that there was a Station A at Imphal. There was a Station 4 at U Camp. U Camp is important because that was the base of Peacock's P Force. There was apparently an A3 set available for patrols, and Station R was due to be deployed. So there doesn't seem to be an insignificant amount of communications equipment being put into the Chindwin front. There's also, in a report by Captain Wilson, a reference to a Station 2. So I suppose we could extrapolate from that if there's a Station 4 and a Station 2, there's presumably a 1 and a 3. If there's a Station A, well, was there a B, C, D, etc.? Major C.B. Jones was given an operational instructor to leave Calcutta for Tamu on the 23rd of January 1943. So this shows you how quickly SOE was trying to get back into the action. He was going with a party consisting of 2 signallers and 3 agents. In the preamble to this instruction, the intelligence he was given advised that there have been no Japanese in the Chindwin Valley north of Moor Lake, apart from occasional officers with the Burma Independence Army. Further, that the Japanese are reported to be building roads in the Chindwin Valley. So SOE's feeding intelligence back in this time before Ugo. Whether the intelligence from C.B. Jones there was from SOE or other sources is unknown. But Major Jones was tasked with going to the area to gain more intelligence, as well as to organise agents and propaganda. And there seems to be quite a few agents put in place in the Chindwin area operating in Imphal. One document refers to 7 agents by their code names. Their code names are Falstaff, Poins, Arrowhead, which is slightly more agentish, I think, Agent Arrowhead, than Agent David, Agent Wilfred, Agent Thomas, and Agent Goldberg. David, I've managed to identify as Mungsor Tun, who was living in Tamu. David and a headman from a Kuki village were tasked with starting an opium smuggling racket. Opium being quite widely used to help with altitude and things in Burma, but also for the currency. So he was charged. They're going to start an opium smuggling racket between Tamu and Shwebo. Wilfred was tasked with obtaining guides from the eastern side of the Chindwin. So they were going across the Kabul Valley and over the Chindwin River to find guides to help with 14 Army was probing into the Kabul Valley in the run-up to Ugo, and in fact there were some battles going on, of which more later. Falstaff was possibly going to accompany Wilfred for the most dangerous part of his journey. Quotation there. Falstaff was advised to look out for agents between 8 and 10 a.m. at Sagaing Station and outside the courthouse between 12 o'clock and 2 p.m. And Falstaff would ask for a match, and then he would give the match sign. Now, I have no idea what the match sign was, so if there's any sleuths out there and anyone who knows a bit of spycraft could explain what the match sign is. If someone gives you a match, I don't know if it's something generic or if it was something specific to them there, but that's what's in the documents anyway. There was another scheme, quite interesting, for floating bamboo cases containing propaganda leaflets, matches again, and cigarettes down the Chindwin River. Each bamboo float was to have the Burmese words for hidden treasures burnt on the outside of the box, because apparently this should attract attention. There were to be at least 4 phases to the release of the bamboo cases down the river, with the first 2 paragraphs of the song, along with matches and cigarettes in the 3rd flotation. And there's more mystery here, though. What was the song? No idea. And presumably it was intended to be used as part of a code or cipher, so for getting messages back and getting intelligence back across the Chindwin front. In another example of intelligence being gathered by SOE in the period before Ugo, Captain Wilson reported in August 1943 that he predicted a Japanese attack at the end of the rains during the first weeks of October 1943. So he was out by a few months. But he also offered his opinion that Japanese would be able to feed themselves from the land, the harvest having just been brought in. Of course, we know that's what the Japanese did do in the end. They thought they were going to survive on Churchill rations. Apparently, the Japanese also knew that the roads from India would not be up to any standard to have allowed large numbers of troops to have been brought up to the Imphal front. And I think in that the Japanese were wrong, but that's what they were thinking at the time, according to this report. Thirdly, for this section, liaison and cooperation with the army. During February 1944, SOE's Brigadier Guinness toured the Imphal front, and his subsequent report contains information not only about P-Force, which we'll start talking about in a moment, but also the Indian field broadcasting units, who we're also going to talk about in a moment. 202 and 203 IFBU were with 17 Division. He also talks how he visited General Wingate to discuss cooperation in the Second Chindit Cooperation. There's actually quite a lot of cooperation with the Chindits for Operation Thursday. Not all ended up going well, and there's a bit of animosity on SOE's part because we had someone sitting on a drop zone for a drop that never came, and they were annoyed that they were being exposed to such danger and not being told that the drop wasn't coming. And he also talks, though, about a visit to 14th Army where he met General Slim, and Slim is supposed to have stated, this is a quote, Slim stated that the only priority task that he would like us to undertake next year would be attacks on the new Arakan Coast Road. So I think that gives you a bit of an impression of what Slim was thinking at that point about Arakan and getting SOE in down there, which of course they were. So SOE is active down in the Arakan as well. In Major Boyd's report, something else I think that's important is he talks about having lent Captain Stanley White to 20 Division as officer commanding a rivercraft company and general advisor on riverine transport. This is because before the war, White had been employed by the Irrawaddy Flotilla Company. Now, this officer, Captain White, was earmarked to go and join P-Force, but they let him go to the army. They agreed to let him go to the army. And the army then wanted him permanently because he could be of so much use, and indeed he was later, of course, after Ugo. So they took him on permanently. Boyd agreed that this should happen. And well, why do I mention this? I think it's important because it's acts of cooperation like this. So SOE could have said, no, he's our man now. You can't have him, sort of thing. But these acts of cooperation, placing level-headed liaison officers at corps level, at division level, at battalion level, men such as Brigadier Guinness that I've mentioned, Major Boyd, and there's also Captain Kemble at 4 Corps. It begins to show, I think, a much more intricate integration of SOE within the army structure and planning. So we can see they've got communications, we've got agents, We've got liaison officers, and we've got a little bit more besides. So P-Force is named after Edgar Peacock. There he is, photographed, newly striped as a sergeant. So this is he passed out as a sergeant in October 1940. Of course, he ended the war as a lieutenant colonel with a DSO and an MC and bar. Time precludes too much to talk back, too much background here, but briefly, Peacock knew Burma extremely well. He had pretty much lived in the remotest parts of Burma for 18 years in his career as a forestry officer. He spoke the languages, as well as Urdu, having been born and went to school in India. So he spoke Urdu, he spoke a bit of Karen, and he spoke Bamar. So huge amounts of experience, totally comfortable in the environment, and able to, well, he knew the locals, he knew the indigenous populations. So he's fought very hard to get himself sent to India. He'd previously been on Ceylon. That's a whole new section on in the book. I was researching what was going on in Ceylon in 1942-43 to cover Edgar's career there. And there's some remarkable stuff going on in Ceylon, and some great war diaries uncovered for that part of the book. I already knew about the existence of P-Force before researching this biography, but the greater details of what he and his friend Major Eustace Poles did for 14 months, from deployment on the Chindwin front, just to the front of Imphal, from April 1943 until the end of May 1944, has been an absolute revelation. And as I said, it's mostly come from privately held memoirs, which I've had the privilege of being allowed full access to. He was attached to 20 Division, and they got on famously well with General Gracie. He was put to work patrolling across the Kabul Valley and over the River Chindwin. Peacock's also quite quickly winning the respect of the officers of 100 Brigade with whom he worked, and have trawled through the war diaries of the units that are mentioned in the private papers, and they have yielded to this research as well. So we had a very exciting time, Peacock's grandson and I, at the archives back in November. It was some great moments. So those things that historians live for. Yes, we found it. Because I'd gone through, by that point, I'd gone through so many files and found absolutely nothing. But it's also important to know that there is nothing there and that you have turned that stone. But until then, yeah, I'd had very little joy at the National Archives for certain periods of the biography. So what were they doing there is the question I've finished with on this slide. Well, here's a little flavour from the private papers of Major Poles. We took to the jungle with our small band of cutthroats and played man-eating tiger with the Jap posts on both sides of the Chindwin, murdering and grabbing prisoners and occasionally doing a reconnaissance across the river. We did a little to prepare the way for Wingate's first adventure. And that might sound a bit outlandish, and murdering and being cutthroats and playing man-eating tiger, but I added this next slide in just last night because I thought it was important to give a bit of context. And this is from the war diary of 3/8 Gurkha Rifles. And this sort of sets out, this is, as you can see there, extracts taken from 20 Division. This is how actively they were patrolling in the Kabul Valley. This is what they were thinking, how they needed to behave there. The main intention is always to kill Japanese, but we require different methods for each side of the Chindwin. We must keep the initiative and patrol with a view to killing Japs. Recce patrols find where he is in this area or how he patrols, and fighting patrols attack his newly established positions as found and or ambush him on the routes he patrols. Every recce patrol, however small, can also kill or capture Japanese. So they're not messing around, going around too quietly. So this is 14 Army and P-Force doing these patrols across that Kabul Valley. The next slide is a little bit from Peacock himself in a letter home to his wife Geraldine. He says, "I can say so little, but I'm right in the front line as a guerrilla, and you can imagine that it is difficult for me to give and receive mail except when I come back to base. My last patrol was a grueling one in constant rain with not a day's rest for 16 days. We hit the enemy 3 times and on each occasion killed some of them without losing one of my men. We are resting at my base camp for a bit before going out again." And for a bit, it seems that the rest at base camp was a couple of days here and there before going straight back out. Lastly, on this part, this is an excerpt from the biography, which shows the close cooperation with the army in offensive operations in the Kabul Valley. It was mentioned in here the little place called Chokchor. That's where the 14 army units that took part in that battle were experimenting with air and land cooperation, so putting in attacks with air support. And there was a couple of failures there, but P-Force were involved in helping with this attack in the Kabul Valley. So by 14th of January, Edgar and his patrol were on a bluff overlooking the U River where it meets the Chindwin. 3 villages, including Ewa, were in sight, with Ewa just 700 feet from their position. 2 Japanese sentries came within 150 feet of where they were laid up and could have been shot, but such action would have been premature. Fires were observed burning all night on both banks of the Chindwin and at 4 other grid references. Having held his fire on the 14th of January, orders were to open up on any fair target on the 15th of January or await the bombing of Chokchor and then shoot any target. In the event, just before midday, Captain Norana's section opened up. The villagers began running around in panic. P-Force joined in, shooting at all the Japanese posts observed in the time since their arrival and anything else that presented itself. Edgar wrote, "Since no attempt was made to return fire from the post near us, I sincerely hope that we blotted out its personnel, but of this I cannot be sure." So very, very active in the run-up to Ugo. Just a quick bit on the IFBUs. They were set up under the command of Major George Steer. Slim warmly welcomed the idea of these propaganda units. After they'd been trialled in the Arakan, there's 3 units on the way to the Chindwin front at the beginning of February 1944, so they arrived just in time for Ugo. Peacock had actually been on a bit of leave. He was expecting to come back from that leave with the IFBU officers and for them to work together, but that didn't materialise. But the IFBUs are forced to retreat with the main units back over the border into Manipur with the Japanese offensive when it started. So in summary for this bit, by the time the Japanese launched Ugo, SOE had about 6 wireless sets, lots of agents going through the lines of various schemes. They were feeding back the intelligence. P-Force was the size of a company. We had 3 newly deployed IFBUs and had liaison officers working at Army, Corps and divisional levels. So there's quite a lot going on integrated with the Army in the Imphal Chindwin front area before the Japanese attack, the so-called March on Delhi. I've written about the psychological warfare units here with the diary of Captain Alfred Trutvine. Major Alfred Trutvine, he actually did keep the rank of major, so we need to alter the title of that, but here they are with a map in the first week in March 1944. They'd been sent there to carry out frontline propaganda, but what they ended up doing was fighting at the Battle of Imphal. So the IFBUs actually took about 70 casualties in the troops that were assigned as their protection while they set up these loudspeakers to talk to the Japanese. So they're definitely they're on the front line at Imphal there, and there's some really interesting stories of what they were up to. And this map here, I think, is really important as well. This was sent to me through the Twitter community of historians, and I just wonder how many people have sort of looked at this map and gone, "Oh, IF bumps. Never really read about that in any of accounts of the Battle of Imphal." And I wonder if they found out what it was. Well, the IF bumps are the IFBU bumps. This is where they were based. So they've got their own position, along with all those really well-known names that you'll recognise from the Battle of Imphal, like Scraggy, Malta, Gibraltar, and all of the rest. So the IFBUs are right there in the thick of it. And this is just one revelation that stuck with me. On the 11th of April, 3 companies of Devons retook Nippon Peak, and that night fought off fierce Japanese attacks. In the morning, I was sent to count the Japanese dead. This is Major Trutwein in his diary. I saw 45 bodies in all within the wire defences, with one body 4 feet from the muzzle of a Bren. Here is where I saw even brave men are afraid to die, and the look of abject fright frozen on their faces told me this. I also saw the reason for this. 15 yards away down the slope was an upright body leaning against the trunk of a tree, and his gun aimed at the people in front of him stuck on the fork. It was the body of a Japanese officer. This was quite a revelation, I thought, because we always hear about how the Red Commissars shot the Red Army for not going into battle, but I didn't realise that the Japanese needed this sort of motivation as well. And this is by 11th of April. So I think that's pretty telling. P-Force. There's the cover of the new book. And it's time for that eureka moment that I had as an historian. And sort of the inspiration behind this talk, really. We knew that P-Force was there. We knew that they'd been patrolling across the Chindwin Valley. But what was revealed after they got back through the lines, because when the attack went in, when Ugo went in, P-Force had gone out on patrol, and they were quite far behind the lines. The Japanese had gone through, so they had to get back through the lines. There's a really amazing. Edgar's first MC was for the rescue of an injured officer, Captain Gibson. But then what happened to P-Force? I had no idea. The archives were just giving me dates of personnel from the indigenous files, from the Burmese personnel, that they'd been withdrawn at this March or April or May. But then there was just this substantial gap. The first real fix you get afterwards is that P-Force were at a place called Camp Tweed, a rest camp, by June of 1944. So what on earth was going on? And this is what I found. So they won through. They won through. They accompanied retreating forces to Palel, and they occupied a defensive box during the decisive Battle of Imphal. So you have a company-sized unit of SOE actually fighting at the Battle of Imphal around Palel. And the big finds in November at the archives added more flavour to that and gave a bit more of an idea of what they were up to, and so they're actually mentioned in some of the war diaries. But we know that they weren't just in a defensive box either, because little chits of Poles's diary that never got delivered are asking for scentless mosquito cream, for example, and also setting out their proactive role. They weren't just sitting in a defensive box. So there's the big reveal. SOE fought at the Battle of Imphal. It wasn't just psychological units. They had an actual unit there as well, which I don't think has ever been appreciated until now. It wasn't their job to be there. They were supposed to be miles behind the lines, kicking up a fuss in the guts of the enemy. But here we go. They were there. So beyond Imphal, I've got 2 minutes if I'm going to keep to my timings, aren't I? On the 16th of November 1944, the commander of Force 136, Colin Mackenzie, wrote his outline of how SOE would support Operation Capital. So that's after the defeat of the Japanese at Imphal Kohima. The Operation Capital is the advance back into Burma that goes so well it becomes extended capital. But straight away, SOE are there in support of capital. And here is a load of operations that they put in. This is all 7 of these went in. They weren't all successful, but all 7 of these operations went in support of capital. As it says at the top there, operations in support of Operation Capital. And then extended capital. Most of these men here this is Major Poles in the middle. This is his special group. And so although that company of men, all those men that have been recruited on the Chindwin front formed special groups. They were retrained after Camp Tweed in Ceylon, as well as going to Chaklala for parachute training, and they were dropped in on Operation Character, and they operated on the flank of 14 Army's advance on Rangoon. And here they are. I think we're dating this photo to about August, and these are all the original P-Force men all together at Otter with Peacock there, and also Subedar Major Tun Sain there's been with Peacock all the way through this as well, so he seems to be a remarkable officer also taking part in this, so it's not exclusively Caucasian men. You can see that there's what's important here as well is it's all the ethnicities of Burma are represented here. Bemar, Karen, there's even a Kuki in there somewhere. So lots of you see they've all got their wings. It's great that they took these cameras in and we've got this record. So conclusions on 2051. I think what we can say is that SOE was involved, closely integrated and supporting the campaign in Burma all the way through, from December 1941 all the way to the surrender in August 1945 and beyond, because the Peacock himself was in the field until November 1945. So I'm saying that SOE supported regular forces for the duration of the Burma campaign around that horseshoe of Burma. They did have strategic impact in the end as everything grew. I think SOE's relationship with the army is much more complex than perhaps previously appreciated, with all those liaison officers and all the communications equipment and all the agents and intelligence. SOE, specifically P-Force, were an important part of 14 Army's activity on the Chindwin front, 1943-44, and we now know that they actually contributed directly to the Battle of Imphal in a way that just hasn't been known or recognised until now. So that's me, 2 minutes over. There you go. There's SOE's contribution to Burma.
Well done, Richard. That's absolutely amazing stuff. I'm really looking forward to the book. There are lots and lots of questions in my head that we're probably not going to have time for. You and I need to get together. You may well have picked up some of this in the book on Peacock, but I'm really intrigued at the extent to which P-Force supported Operation Longcloth in 1943. That's really fascinating. Because one of my criticisms on Longcloth, I'm currently writing a book on it, is that Wingate didn't do enough close combat reconnaissance. He didn't know what was ahead of him as the columns were advancing into Burma. A lot of it was guesswork. Couple of questions that have come out of tonight, and on that point, it'd be really interesting to understand the degree to which Force 136 really was integrated with some of the reconnaissance operations we know that were being undertaken by 20 Division. We know that 20 Division across the Chindwin had lots of advanced patrols, and understanding how well these are coordinated at divisional and corps and army level would be very, very interesting. There are some I think I'm going to send to you, which you can answer separately. There's one from Tim Stubbs about his father, I think, Tim, or grandfather, who's quite an extraordinary character. And there's a family tradition that he was a member of SOE, and you're the man to find that out. You made a quick offhand comment, perhaps not offhand, a quick comment earlier about Nazi progenitors to SOE, and Nick Short, who has some experience in this particular field of work, would like to understand what they were. I suggested Abwehr, but he quickly shot me down in flames by suggesting the Abwehr weren't very smart, and I agree with him. Maybe we can pick that up separately. You'll be in contact with Nick, no doubt, on Twitter. And there's another question from Louise about the degree or the extent to which SOE worked occasionally with the Chindits, my point earlier, but maybe, and you've touched on Operation Thursday in February to August 1944, and of course NCAC and Merrill's Marauders. Yes, and another question from George Wilton about the relationship between OSS and SOE. You might simply answer them by saying they're in your book, Richard. If not, then perhaps we can have some longer, you can respond now, we can have some longer responses by email.
Okay, yeah, I think we'll go to the email.
Okay. And John, let's do it by email. There's some complicated questions there. Well, not complicated, but they require a longer response. My friend John Hinchcliffe down at Padstow. Did you come across Major Headley? Well, we know Major Headley very well, don't we, Richard?
Operation Bison.
Yeah,
part of Operation Nation, but Team Bison.
And his Operation Nation, of course, and his relationship with Aung San and the Burmese is very, very important. And a question about from Darren on his grandfather's brigade, 3 Commander Brigade in Arakan, and the extent of SOE liaison with them. Well, I can tell you they did. There was considerable SOE liaison with the troops in Arakan. They did a lot of briefing. We know that Captain Irwin was responsible, in fact, for briefing 3 Commander Brigade when they went in. Jags, there's a lovely question here. Did SOE try to influence INA activities? Well, we know the relationship between SOE and the Burmese Defence Army. What about the INA, Richard?
Yeah, I said I was going to mention that. I just had to skip a bit because otherwise it would probably be gone 9 o'clock now. The IFBUs, this is from 14 Army. They attributed it to the IFBUs. They got a battalion of INA to surrender at Imphal. And actually, we were always told, aren't we, that the Japanese never surrendered. Well, the IFBUs got the Japanese to wave a white flag at least 4 times at Imphal in the thick of the fighting.
Well, I didn't know that. That's absolutely extraordinary. Well, one of my friends, Gautam Hazarika in Singapore, has just written a new book on the INA, and he talks about, in the book, I'm writing a forward for it, he writes, been published by Penguin in India and Peninsul in the UK. He describes the Palal attack, the INA attack on Palal, and the sort of blasé way in which the troops walked into the defences at Palal at the airfield, believing their own propaganda. It's quite a tragic story, really. And yes, Japanese troops surrendering. That's quite an extraordinary story. We know that only about 600 Japanese soldiers surrendered in total.
Yeah, and most of those that surrendered at Imphal, they had the surrender tickets that the IFBUs sent over to them. So they'd adapted the mortars to fire canisters of leaflets and things. And there's also stories how they were just in the frontline trench within throwing distance. So get the condensed milk can, stick the notes or the propaganda leaflets in, and just hurl them into the Japanese trench to get the message across. And the people that were writing the messages in Japanese were Koreans. So there's a team of 8 Koreans working with the IFBUs, which has led me down another rabbit hole.
Is this in Trotvine's book or in your new book on Peacock?
It's in the Trotvine book, and it's also in a bit more write-up because I did some work for the South Koreans there.
Oh, fabulous.
So
that's absolutely right. We can't go on for much longer. I think what we'll do is we will get you to respond to these questions in slow time, Richard, if you don't mind, and they'll be posted on the website.
Sure.
There's very, very good questions here. Thank you very much for all of them. I'm afraid we can't answer all of them, but there's absolutely amazing. We'll get an answer to you out to answer all these questions in the next few days. In the meantime,
more slides.
It's just my job is to thank you, Richard, for a really illuminating session, and I'll hand back to Sylvia now to talk a little bit about what's going on the KT.
Well, I won't mention our most recent initiative at the beginning, but thank you, Rob, and thank you, Richard, very, very much. That was brilliant talk. There's lots and lots of feedback, which I'll be sending through to both of you. And I wanted also just another quick mention of your previous book, SOE in Burma, which I think is still available.
I've got copies at home that I can sign and send if people
Brilliant. That's excellent. And just to remind everyone, as you know, you regular viewers, I love to plug our shop, and Richard's already done a good one on the ties. But we have a wide selection of books available. And most recently, we've added E.J. Lockhart's Frontline and Fortitude, which is going to be the subject of our webinar in April, which we're all very much looking forward to, the story of the Wasbies.
I've just read it.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
It's well worth a read. Excellent.
Absolutely brilliant. And I've got copies of that which can be sold. And we'll meet Liz in April. I think Liz is with us tonight, whether she's still there. She was certainly going to be watching. And David Lutkin's 1,000 Places Left Behind. I know the Lutkin family are watching tonight. And this is going to be our webinar in May. And hopefully we'll also have some copies available. But more imminent, and just to close, is our webinar next month, when Professor Bob White will be talking us through the treasures of the that make up the Kohima Museum in York. If you haven't yet visited the museum there, you have a treat in store. It is a fascinating collection that gives you that the guys there are extremely knowledgeable, and the curator Bob Cook has also led tours in Nagaland and gives brilliant presentations when you're there. The best way to visit is to book, make an appointment, but it will be well worth your day. But we'll hear all about that next month. Thank you again, Richard. Thank you, Rob, and look forward to seeing you all then. Good night.
Thanks, everyone.